I'll be basically going to talk in general about atmospheric aerosol transport, indoor and outdoor. And then I'm going to introduce our computational model for predicting how aerosol particles move around in different situations, in indoor and outdoor application, and in respiratory kind of situation, in breathing and so on. And finally, I'm going to focus mostly actually on transmission of COVID-19 through aerosol transmission, which is now recognized as probably the main way that the virus is being transmitted. And then conclude and basically stop at that point. Well, actually, there's a lot of particles and aerosol in air that we breathe, of the order of 100,000 particles in cubic centimeter. And there are, mostly of them are, of course, inert and does not harm human. But, you know, is a huge number of aerosol in Earth atmosphere. Estimate goes about, about 500 to 2,000 million ton per year of particles are emitted through, soil dust, forest fire, volcanic activities, and sea salt and gas to particle conversion and so on. So these particles are always around and are basically distributes in the air. I found a picture here which is kind of a little more dramatic of a dust storm in some desert areas that you can visually see the aerosol or particle transport in visually. And typically their concentration is very low and we don't really see them, but we breathe them. This is another NASA picture. This is the Red Sea and shows that, wind can actually transfer aerosol long distances. And many of our measurements in the US shows they go, 500, 1,000 miles probably can go from one area to another area. Okay, I'll be talking mostly about, a computer modeling approach and with some experimental verification to be able to look at how aerosol particles are transported in various situations. We first have to know how the flow or airflow actually are moving, because the airflow carries the particles. For simulating airflow, in atmosphere or any indoor area or whatever, there are different techniques. One is called direct numerical simulation, which is the most accurate but most expensive. And so far, we could do small geometries with the power of the computer available to us. Large-D simulation is the next kind of level, which is we simulate the large scale motion, and then the subgrid scale smaller than the grid size, we basically model. And then there are so-called Reynolds average models, which is, I put here a couple of them. It's called RANS, Reynolds average model, stress transport model, or two equation models, and so on, which are we basically average the flow and then, try to model the airflow, which is typically in turbulent state of motion. And that's the complication that, causes some issues. The issue is the aerosol particles are very tiny. They are nanometer, micron, tens of micron. At, well, the most common of the order of 10 of micron may go to 20, 50, or 100 maximum at the upper limit that they fall quickly to Earth. For direct numerical simulation, actually we resolve all the scale of fluctuation, and therefore no additional modeling is needed. But when you do, LES or a RANS model, we need to understand how the fluctuation, disperses the particle. And there are different models. There's subgrid scale models. There are Gaussian filtered model, PDF models, and various types. And these need to be, able to accurately kind of, generate the fluctuation so that we can come up with reasonable answers. After we do the flow, which I did not skip all the equation, but I'm showing only one equation, and this is actually the particle motion. A single particle essentially follows the Newton's law of motion. Mass times acceleration equal to all the forces, and the forces are drag force, which is the main force, lift force, gravity, electrical, and for nanometer particle, probably Brownian excitation. And you know, and in most situations, the particle density or not, the concentration not very high, so we can use so-called one-way coupling. We do the flow, and then we trace millions of particles or more, whatever is needed to get our accurate estimates. There are some details in here which we'll skip here, that how to evaluate these forces correctly. But no matter what we do and all these assumptions, then we need to sort of verify our model. Here is actually a verification done a few years back by Dr. Tian and myself, that we looked at, deposition velocity of particle in a channel. A simple channel actually is the hardest case, because turbulence essentially become the key deposition mechanism here. From nanometer size, which is on this corner, where is my pointer? Okay, it's here. Yes, you cannot move very fast. This is actually nanometer particles of the order of 10 nanometer, and this side goes to about 100 nanometers. And relaxation time actually is the what we use is proportional to diameter squared density over viscosity. And these are prediction of various models, some of it ours and some of it basically, Fluent code and other codes here. And we can see that, these are, the experimental data are little green dots here. You can see that, the deposition actually goes through a U-shape variation. And this is here for the smaller one, a nanometer one. Brownian motion dominates, and you have a lot of deposition. When you go to the other end, again, the number goes up because of the inertia impaction. Bigger particle have more inertia and impact the wall and deposit. Some range here, which is basically between 100 nanometer to a micron range, we have minimum deposition, and this is actually a logarithmic scale. So the difference is of the order of 10 to the 4, is not a small. Some of the commercial code prediction are shown up here with trying to do all the best we can, and still we have an error of the order of 1,000 times in this range certainly. And but with the correct formulation, you can actually capture the rate of deposition, and this is in some respect become important for coronavirus, which is of the order of 120 nanometer, just in this range, and it can penetrate nose very easily actually if they are single. Typically they're in droplets, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Then some of the correction I basically pointed out, the way the fluctuation near the wall goes and so on. These are explained in some of the earlier papers, and if you're interested, you can look into those. This is our more recent analysis that we also improved the model for the turbulent simulation. And again, our simulation are in this range, and agrees with the data. And these are some of the commercial code kind of simulation, which is way off in a sense. So in some respect, we could at least verify our model in some limited scale. Now we can look at various problems, and I'm going to show you a few examples and then go back to the corona case. This is actually Center of Excellence building here on this corner. This is a new, well, not new anymore. It's been probably about 10 years ago, a little more. And it's a very nice building in Syracuse, New York, which is south of us, south of our university by about 100 miles. And this has intersection of two highways. This is 81 and this is 629 here. And there is a lots of dust generation and so on. And this was built by New York State for the, for the group of universities, Syracuse and others, to study the air pollution area. And we did a modeling of this building. This is during construction. These are after being built and so on. And we also did some, experimental as well as numerical study on this building. This is an experimental model of the building, which is, a small to be fitting. This is our wind tunnel that we tested, and this is the model in the tunnel. So it's a smaller version, much smaller version to be tested in the tunnel. And we use PIV method to make the velocity measurement and test our numerical simulation. Here, this is actually PIV measurement. A different section is a lot of data here. I'll show you just one section, which is just about here. At this section, there's a step here, and the PIV measurement shows that the flow essentially separates at this corner and actually reattaches at this point, and then continues like that basically. So you have a separation bubble here. And these are various turbulence model. This is RSM model, which gets the general feature correct, but misses the reattachment point at this point. This is LES model, large eddy simulation model that seems to capture the reattachment as well, and certainly is more accurate, but computationally very expensive. And then, these are some large eddy simulation of the flow around the building here, that at one section, we are saying the flow essentially has large fluctuation. And also this is for a block here. I don't know if I can start that, I guess not. This is for a block very similar. So the flow has large scale fluctuation, also a small scale turbulence. This is an example of a street canyon. You have these are different buildings. Here's a cross section. There are buildings around here. Okay. Oops. Well, I guess the particle essentially goes between the buildings, more or less. That's the story there. Here, okay, there's some emission, and then it's transported by the flow. So even emission in one street can go to other streets, and then we try to verify again this model with some experimental data of Moroni and co-worker here, which is it's a model prediction and experimental data. We are there is a general agreement certainly between the prediction and that. It's a little bit larger scale here. Is a little bit, here we have a peace bridge between Canada and US and Buffalo. And this is Buffalo here. This is the peace bridge. This area is actually a custom area. And typically lots of trucks comes from Canada bringing food and meat and etc. And they have to clear the custom right in here. So a lot of them are running their engine because the refrigeration system should work when they are bringing meat and etc. Unfortunately, nearby is lots of people living area here, very close to this peace bridge and this custom area. Some years ago, I ran into Dr. Lubaga Mutaka, who is a specialist in lung in University of Buffalo Medical School, and he showed me this picture. Actually, apparently his hobby was to collect location that people have asthma in the city of Buffalo. And and these are the concentration of the people. They basically, when they come to him, he gives them prescription and takes care of them. And also for their address, they put a dot on this, on this map. And what we see here is a lot of concentration here. As you go away from here, concentration decreases. And the question he asked me, I was presenting some of these aerosol transmission stuff, and this is the Peace Bridge right in here. And he was saying, okay, is there any connection between Peace Bridge and having people having 7 times more asthma in this area than compared to other areas? And this is a schematic of the area. This is Peace Bridge coming in, custom area, and these are the residential area. We did a modeling of this area. Actually, this is of the order of a mile by mile, a kind of area and a height of, about, I guess, 100 or 200 meters. And then we did some simulation that, if there are trucks here and they lose, I don't know if it's supposed to rerun again, but anyway, it basically shows that this area that we predict, the red area, which is the maximum concentration, coincides with what he saw in that, in that area of Buffalo. Okay, so this was a little bit more general. Let's focus a little bit on COVID-19. This is a lot of interest these days, and we are trying to protect everyone, and hopefully the vaccine seems to be on the horizon. Originally when we were get aware of the COVID-19 transmission, the idea was direct transmission. By touching stuff, people felt you transfer the virus. But then later in realize, in fact, we wrote a couple of articles on this, that, aerosol transmission is important. And I think, finally this was recognized in last late spring. And basically by coughing, sneezing, or talking even, aerosol are emitted, droplets are emitted from the, from the infected person, and could disperse, and other people could get infected if they receive sufficient dose, basically. And these are some of the information from the literature. These are the size distribution of droplets for coughing. And this was done by Doggett, actually in 1946, a very old paper, but it's a very important paper. It still uses sort of the average of the order of, maybe 15, macron, but it's a distribution with a peak here and then generates that kind of things. And then, Yang and Fang here, they studied the volumetric flow rate of cough, which shows, it's certainly a transient effect, and that expels the droplets, in the surrounding area. And if sneezing, on the other hand, actually, this is the, again, by Hannah, there are several data available. This is by Hannah et al. There are actually two modes. One is basically like this, basically, which has a peak of the order of, several hundred, close to half a millimeter or almost droplets are emitted during sneezing. It's very explosive. The velocity is very high, of the order of 50 meters per second. And for the double modes, some people have that kind of variation, one near 100 and one near 500. And then for speaking, actually, people realize that there is also emission of droplets. Very recent paper by Asadi and Wexler and others, and this is the number of particles versus size. And when people speak, they generate, of the order of a macron-sized particles. And this is a distribution. And then how loud you speak, it makes a difference also. These are normalized here. So when you loud talk has a lot more emission, or singing has more emission. A quiet talk, much less, basically. But that's the size range, and these are all become important, and the concentration is written on this side, basically. Long ago, 1934, Mr. Wells was an engineer at that time, were actually concerned with this kind of, aerosol transmission. And he figured, that a very important paper, which is still we are using. Right now, we are told we have to be 6 feet, 2 meters apart. And the reason is because of this paper. What he found out that when aerosol are emitted from a person, and then the droplet evaporates, or if it's very big, it falls toward the ground. And, and then if you look at how far they can essentially transform, the distance they'll go is actually of the order of 2 meters. They either evaporate by this distance, depending on the original size, and also, or drop to the floor from the mass level by gravity. So basically, that's what we have. Now we use 6 feet or 2 meters stay away to avoid direct exposure to corona droplets. These studies have done by a number of people more recently, and this is basically very similar one. This is by evaporation in this wing, and then the droplet to ground basically on this width, and that shows this size particle probably has the largest length of the order of about 2 meters. One issue, of course, in all of these is the evaporation of the of the droplets does not mean the virus is gone. The droplet could evaporate, but the virus is not going to evaporate, and so the total viral content of the droplet remains fixed. And also, when the droplet evaporates to a certain level, it slows down when they essentially gets like a porous media with all the viruses and water in between them and so on. So that issue still is kind of up in the air. That is 2 meters is really enough or not. These are again more work here on on different emission velocity. These are sort of speaking. This is sneezing. This is coughing here, and then how far basically different droplet sizes, how far they go. This is actually the distance that they travel, and this is for sneezing is of the order of 6 to 7 meters. It could go actually. For talking is quite small, of the order of a half a meter maybe, and for coughing by about 2 meters. So that's really the limit we are using, and of course RH of the surrounding and etc. are also important to affect that. These are some simple simulation here. We are looking 2 people sitting on a desk in a room, and then there's the air conditioning system, and one person coughs and drops some particle, and how it gets captured or breathed in by the next person. That's kind of relevant to see the chance for exposure of the people. Indoor, certainly the aerosol chance is much higher because the particle concentration is higher, and they have to be cleaned by the by the air conditioning system. We have done it for more, this is a sort of a more natural looking human being, more extensive calculation. Some of these are actually published and available. This is a hospital room. One patient has corona and the other one may be not infected. And the question is how to design the air conditioning to avoid infection of the other person. And this is actually in a an aircraft, which is again the similar situation. You may have an infected person coughing here, or even speaking, or even breathing. And then the question is how to design the air conditioning to avoid transmission to others, basically. We also looked at, the aerosol transmission through, through nose and lung, and how far, how deep they go, and, how could people can get infected potentially. This is a model what Dr. Lean has developed, one of my ex-PhD student. We call it multi-level model. I mean, lung has, 23 bifurcation. Nobody has done the entire lung together as yet, but this model of we basically model piece by piece and go from one level to the next level. At every level, we transfer all the information, flow, particle concentration, etc., from one level to the next level, and so on. And this is sort of a 1 micron particle entering the trachea, going through first bronchus, and see what happens. As the particle pass through, they deposit on the side of the lung roughly uniformly. Most of it will pass through. 1 micron particle penetrates very deep into the lung. This is much larger, 30 micron particles. And as you can see, when they hit here, majority of it get deposited here by impaction, basically. So the particle size is quite critical for this. We have done through the nozzle passage quite a bit of work, and some of it are available and some is ongoing. There's again air coming through the nose, and the question is, where do they deposit? What size it get through? As I mentioned, 0.1 to 1 micron is most critical and passes through the nose. I mean, all of these were small pieces, sort of. We have done a combination. This is a more recent paper that we have, flow through the nose and lung and through the bifurcation of the lung to additional extent. This is another example. This is a 20 micron particle going through the nose and the entire passage. And the question is, where do they deposit? One question that we want to know typically is, if you have a concentration around you of a certain level, what is the aspiration ratio? How much people will breathe? And this, is without thermal plume, ignoring the temperature difference of the body and the surrounding. This green line is basically the rate of, aspiration. Bigger particle, we cannot aspire. Smaller particle, we essentially inhale in. Because of the thermal plume, actually, there's a flow generated near the body that attracts, move the particle or flow toward the breathing zone, and that will actually increase the, the blue one is actually the, this is a paper a couple of years ago published by us. It's basically increases up to about 20 micron. You actually, inhale more. So, but bigger particle is not as much affected. One last question I'm going to try to answer before ending this talk is, what about mask? How much mask helps into protecting us? These are, some studies from Dr. Fang and Dr. Zhang here, recently published. Is actually, this is the surgical mask. Actually, this is the N95 mask, which is most effective. Practically captures all sizes from, from 10 nanometer to, or much larger. And only in this range, there is a small fraction, about 0.1 micron, that passes through. Surgical mask, which we are all using these days, is actually this red one, which is, pretty effective for more than, 2 micron or 3 micron. But between 0.1 and 1, unfortunately, there is some decay, and it's about, of the order of probably 70% or more effective in that range, but it's pretty effective here. The cloth mask, which is just face covering, actually is effective for larger than 10 micron, but doesn't do a lot for smaller particles. Many of this, respiratory exposure is in this range, so they are not as effective. So surgical mask is probably the one that at least we can try. We have a recent paper published in International Journal of Multi-Phase Flow with Dr. Alexander, lead author, that we looked at basically how much protection mask will generate for a concentration of typical concentration around the face, because of generation of somebody coughing or speaking and so on. And this green one essentially is the original concentration. As time goes on and people breathe in and so on, we'll see a lot of it actually are being, essentially, aspirated by the people. So a lot of particles will get in. Anything larger than 10 macron, probably not, but a smaller one would get. I mean, of course, initially you get more than up to about 100 macron can go in, but many of these particles are going to essentially, are removed. But when you wear a mask, I use it here for surgical mask, which is a typical one we have. This is the original concentration, and you can see that, what is aspired is much less. This is a log scale, right? I mean, just look at maybe the black curve. I mean, here is of the order of 100, peak here, and then decreases to this range. With the mask, anything more than 2 macron essentially is cut off. You're not going to breathe it in, and even in this range, the number dropped to about maybe. This peak is about probably, maybe 50% or something like that. So mask will extremely helpful. People should really wear it to protect themselves as well as protect others. This is basically protecting the person, but when emit also the same, capture will happen. Well, to summarize here, I'll just summarize the aerosol transmission of COVID-19 and not the rest. These are very important, actually, and seems to be the main cause of transmission. Computational modeling could help, reduce the, exposure to the extent possible. And recommendation is wear mask in public. Thank you.